Hello, Contributor Summit. Sorry for the chaos. Google decided today was a good time to upgrade my BIOS. I'm Tim. I know a lot of you here. For those of you who don't know me, I've been part of the project for a long time. I have the privilege of getting to look at a lot of the PRs that you guys send in and give them some code review. And as we were getting ready for the Contributor Summit today, we were thinking about like what sorts of interesting talks would go as our community is getting much, much bigger. What are the things that we're experiencing pain with? And I said, one of the problems that I have is I get a lot of code reviews that have already been through other code reviewers, and I still find things that I think we could do better, right? And I said, so how can we work on making everybody here a better code reviewer? And so that spawned the idea for talking a little bit about how I approach code review. And I had some of my colleagues look at it and give me some great feedback on it. So I would like to share with you some of the things that I think about when I'm doing code reviews and try to explain why and how I go about those things so that you can ingest those things so that the more you do them, the less I have to, right? This is purely self-serving. So that said, why do you care? Just this for 1 second. Kubernetes, you might have heard of it. It's a little open source project. It's kind of become this phenomenal thing, almost unique in the world. We have hundreds of repos on GitHub. We have contributors from every single time zone. As far as I know, we don't have anybody from Antarctica, but if you're out there, please let me know, because I really would like to update these slides. We get dozens of pull requests every single day across all these different repos. And some of the repos are code, and some of the repos are not code, but I'm going to focus mostly on code. But really, every single one of those pull requests needs a human to look at it, think about it, figure out how it integrates with the rest of the system, and give feedback to the author on how to make these things better. As we scale out, we need more and more people to be able to do this more effectively. My goal is to share how I personally think about it, and I'm totally open to questions. I've got a lot of material here. I'll burn through it, but if people have questions that are in real time, I'd be happy to do those. So before we get started, when you're going to sit down, you're going to do a code review. You've just received this email that says you've been assigned a pull request from the PR bot, right? We got these wonderful mechanics. First, you got to make the time for code reviewing. This is something that I fail at a ton, right? Anybody who's sent me a pull request and had it languish for a long time, I know some of you are in here. Part of the problem is finding enough time to do code reviews. So you have to make the time. So I've now started, personally, I put time on my calendar, big red block on my calendar, it says do not book code review, right? And then I'm going to use that time to go through whatever's in my code review queue. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't work, but as a code reviewer, if you can't make the real time to do a code review, you probably shouldn't even start on it, right? Because a bad code review is actually maybe worse than no code review, right? False sense of security. You get yourself into the mindset. For me, that means closing Slack, closing other things, and like all the distractions that are gonna be more interesting. And then I go off and I read. All right? I usually spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of any code review session just reading the bugs that are associated with this pull request, because of course you have bugs for your pulls, right? I hope so. And I understand why. Like, get into the mindset of the person who's sending me this PR. Why are you sending it? Now I can actually start, right? That was just prep work. Right? Crack your knuckles, roll up your sleeves. I got to sit down there and I got to understand the change. What are you doing? What's going on here? Many times my first instinct is to start commenting right away, right? Oh, this is wrong. This variable could be better. Oh, this function could be moved over here. And I don't understand what the pull request is doing yet, right? So I've been trying now to not do that, to actually read the whole thing and understand what's going on before I start adding comments. Now, sometimes GitHub's nice now where I can add a bunch of draft comments and I can go back and resolve them later. I probably resolve more comments than I send. And so as I read it, I'm reading the code, but I'm also reading what's around it, right? Where does it fit into the system? And I'm thinking about, okay, they're making this change. What test case would prove that this case isn't completely broken? I'm thinking about how do those APIs fit in with the rest of the APIs around it? I'm big on consistency. Many of you who've been victim of my code reviews hear me complain about that. And I'm thinking about the comments in the docs, like future me is going to really resent current me if I don't demand that I can understand the comments and the flow of what's going on here. Now, something I really want to impart on people, like every single change that we take into our code base is going to make our code base either better or worse. And if you can't look at a PR and see how it makes our code base better, it's the other one. And we need to be really careful at this point. This project is big, it's relied on by a lot of people. We can't afford to degrade the code base in significant ways. So every one of us here is the front line of defense against this. And it's really hard, right? Because here's a contributor who is offering up their sweat, their toil, to have done something that is important to them for some reason. And our job is to make sure that they meet the bar. They don't always know where the bar is, right? And this is tough. And for people who are in here contributors, I hope maybe you can sort of understand this. As a code reviewer, I personally am counting on you to get this and to hold the line on this because it's really important. If the code base spirals down into chaos, we all lose. So let's talk about the actual act of reviewing and the things that we go through review. I hope that nothing here is revolutionary and nothing here is stuff that hasn't been written about before, but I'm going to sort of give you my spin on these things. And I want to encourage everybody here who's doing code review. First of all, anybody can do code review. You don't need to be a core maintainer to do code review. If you're a casual contributor and you've got a few free minutes and you see a pull request that looks interesting, congratulations, you're a code reviewer. Anybody can do code review. There is no limit on the number of people who can offer suggestions on how to make code better. And in fact, I would love it if more of these PRs got more crowdsourced, more eyes on the code. And I want to encourage everybody who's doing those code reviews to hold these ideals, right? These are the things that will keep us from utter chaos. And we have to back each other up on this, right? This is the sort of thing where it's sort of like parents, right? Like you've got to agree on what the rules are. So I'm trying to lay out some rules for you. First, understand the motivation, right? What is the user doing and why? Not every bug report is real, right? Sometimes there are bugs that are user error or are completely non-reproducible or are environmental or who knows what. So you got to look at the bugs that they've clicked through and understand the bugs and try to figure out. Sometimes I will spend time going off and reproducing the bug just to convince myself that it actually is correct, right? How many times have I looked at a pull request or a bug in Kubernetes and been like, that's nuts, that's not right. No, that's right. So spend a little time, understand the bug. Does this PR actually fix the bug, or does it paper over it, or does it do something else that makes the bug less important? And importantly, does this PR prove that it fixes the bug, right? We're at the point in this project where we can't really afford to have code changes without tests. And if any of these things are not there, if these are not being held to, it's okay to push back, right? It's okay to come back to our contributors and say, thank you for this pull request, this really needs a test. Sometimes that test doesn't exist and they have to go off and be the first one to write it, and that's okay, right? Like, I don't actually think we're asking for too much, mostly, when we're asking people to write tests. The other kind of PRs you're gonna get are the features, right? These are the fun ones. And not every feature is something we want, right? And we get a lot of this now, people who wanna do something that scratches their itch. This is the beauty of open source. As the maintainers, we have to understand how every feature fits together, right? I heard that there's a budget of cleverness for the project, and once we run out of budget, that's it. There's no more clever beans to spend, and every feature we add spends a couple of those clever beans. So we have to make sure that the things that they're adding are the things that we actually want, that we understand how it's going to interact and intersect with other features, right? How many times have we added a feature over here and broke something over there, right? The system is big and complicated and interlinked in sometimes non-obvious ways. And more importantly, where's Steven? Where's the KEP? At this point in the project, any non-trivial change warrants a KEP. The KEP process is not that hard. It is not that heavyweight. Write a KEP. And if you find a feature request that you can't quite understand what it's doing or why, ask, where's the KEP? So let's talk a little bit about sort of the style of code. These are sort of superficial things, but they matter a lot. So clarity, right? Is this code the simplest way I can think of to express this problem, right? It's possible, if you look through the code base close enough, to find code that is all sorts of convoluted and twisty and could be simplified in the way it's expressing, right? We're striving for simplifying and finding the most pure way of expressing a change. This is naming, right? Sometimes Go encourages bad habits, like naming things with one letter. Sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's really not, right? Code should read. Like, I like to look at the code and understand it like a story, right? White space is one of those things that people tend to forget about, but actually is really important. White space helps you break your code up into chapters, right? So it's okay for a pull request comment for you to feedback, hey, can you add a blank line between these blocks, right? It would actually really help the flow, or add a comment or explain what the relationship between these two thoughts is. Cohesion is the idea that a thing makes sense as a whole. And so when you look at a file, you have to ask yourself, like, do all the functions in this file belong in this file, right? Do they make sense with each other? As a team, do the functions or the types that are being defined in this code base, do they make sense? Do they fit the mission of this? And it's okay to ask a user, hey, this method doesn't really make sense on this type. What we should do is make a new type that carries this method, and here's how these things should be related together, right? Those are the sorts of refactorings that will make the code better. It's really bad if you're just force-fitting it, like, well, I have the data in this type anyway, so I'll just jam another method on there. It doesn't really make sense, right? But it happens all the time. The question now is, can you break a PR down, both in the terms of what it's doing and in the sort of the size of it, the girth of a code review? We have a bot now that labels pull requests as they come in, and every time somebody sends me an XXL PR, I die a little bit, because I know that it's going to take me 2 hours to review it. And that's going to be a bad experience for you as a contributor if you send me one of these giant PRs. So one of the things I always push back on, can you break this down, right? Can we make this into 2 PRs? Does it make sense? Are there 2 thoughts here that we can extract from each other? But the opposite is also true. Like, I don't want to commit half-cooked work. Once upon a time, we thought it was okay to check the API in and then come along a few days later and check in the implementation, right? We don't do that anymore because it's just too much risk that second part never happens. And then we have an API with no implementation, and then the release comes along, and the release team has to kick out PRs, but they've been touched by other PRs, and it's total mess. So we don't do that anymore. We'll talk in a bit about sort of commit sequencing and commit hygiene. So you've got to make your PRs complete, but you want to try to find the smallest way you can do it. And then it also goes to the scope of the code, right? Like, are you exposing things that you don't need to expose? Are you reaching into places that you don't need to reach into as you're reviewing the code? So as a code base has grown, right? Everyone remembers package util, right? There's code that is general purpose, and there's code that is very specific purpose. And sort of the more deeply specific something is, the less the API matters, and the more sort of leeway you're allowed to give people as you're reviewing their code. If you send me a pull request against github.com Kubernetes utils, you can be darn sure I'm going to pick the heck out of that API, right? Because that is a public API that we're committing to support, that we are saying is usable by people outside of the project even, right? Or by sub-projects across the whole org. I'm going to pick that API to death, and I'm going to scour it for comments and for tests and for function signatures. Something that's buried deep down under package, kubelet, something, 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 like, you know what? I'm okay with that being a little less general purpose. Anybody heard of Hiram's Law? I didn't know the name of it, but I knew the idea of it. The idea is anything that you expose through your application will become a feature of your application. Everything that's in there, somebody will use. And eventually, you can't change anything because everything's being used. So whenever you're writing an API or a module in Go, you need to think about, what am I exposing here, and how are people going to abuse it, right, or use it wrong? There's the idea of, make something easy to use right and hard to use wrong. Very much applies here. So moving beyond style, there's the actual meat. So maybe I'm unique in this. I write as much comment as I write code, usually. And you can tell if you dig through Kubernetes, you can find the code that I've written, because there's big blocks of comments that explain what I'm doing. And I got to tell you the secret, my memory is terrible. I cannot remember what my own rationale was for making certain decisions. And if I don't document it, I will forget it the next time I come through, and I will fix it, right? And future me hates past me when I don't write comments. So I write a ton of comments. When I review code, I tend to ask for a lot of comments. Because if you're doing anything that isn't immediately obvious to me, I want to know why. Right? I want that comment to explain to me why, but not how. I don't want you to explain, well, loop over every variable in this list. That doesn't make sense, right? But if you did some analysis, if you did some testing, or you scoured some other APIs, or you did some debugging and you came to a decision, document that, right? If you wrote a benchmark, document that. If you're just picking a random number, document that. Just write it down so the next person who comes along doesn't wonder, why is this value 93? Why isn't it 0, right? If you think that you or somebody will need to revisit a decision, right? We do this all the time, right? Strategic debt, where we say, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this, but we'll come back to it. To do, leave a comment explaining why we're coming back to it later, and what you think the next person to come along needs to think about here. We have this amazing community of people, and if you give them things to do, they will do them, right? And I have learned this over and over again. If you can give people guidance on what you need them to do, they will do it. So leaving these to-do comments is actually great, because community people can come along and actually help you, right? We can be force multipliers. If the next reader is going to come along and try to fix what you did, you need to document it, right? Anybody's seen these, there was a post a while back about the space shuttle comment buried deep inside Kubernetes somewhere. Like, the team that worked out that code spent days working out the flow of how this code should work, and then we wrote 2 pages of comment explaining why the next person to come through should not obviously fix it, right? Why they were all done on purpose. I'm still very proud of that comment. So now you're looking at the code and you're trying to figure out what's going on. How errors are handled is often a great indicator of the quality of the overall code, right, in my experience. So I'm looking at the errors. Are you doing the right thing with errors, or are you ignoring them? Are you logging them and pretending they didn't happen? Or are you explaining what's going on with the errors and why it's okay to proceed, or why it's the imperative that you return early? Are you thinking about the corner cases, right? This is that space shuttle code again. Are you looking at, well, what is the else to this if? Right? Because for every if, there is an implied else, right? Is the code handling those cases? And then I like to put on my pathological user hat and think, well, what's the dumbest thing I could possibly do with this code? If I'm adding a field to an API, what if I pass a negative number here? Will you catch it? And think through those error cases and through the errors and how those things are going to get handled. And then think through the failure modes, right? Okay, well, if this thing returns, what is the caller of this function going to do with that error? Are they going to retry? Are they going to abort? Are they going to panic? These things are the things that tend to bite us in the butt way too late. If you get these things committed and then a user starts using it, and then you crash loop the controller manager, for example, Rob. While you're in the code, we also have started really relying on the instrumentation that we're putting into Kubernetes. So observability, metrics, right? And logs. Are the logs good and useful and helpful, or are they just going to be spammy garbage, right? Anybody looked at varlog kubelet? Like, it's full of interesting information, and it's really hard to find that information because there's so much stuff surrounding it, right? And this is just a chronic problem with organic software, right? It grows over time, and logs seem important at the time, and they get added, and then over time they turn out to not be useful. So it's really important to think about, how is this log going to help the person who has to look at the log figure out what the heck happened? And I mentioned metrics. We don't need metrics everywhere, but we need more metrics than we currently have. So if you're adding tricky, complicated code for something, if you have a retry loop or a counter or a timer, think about, like, if this thing goes wrong, how will I know if I don't have a metric? Now, Jordan did a great review earlier on API reviews. right? A lot of PRs end up touching either one of the Kubernetes APIs or the CLIs like kubectl or the config fields, right? We've got a lot of the component standard stuff. These are all UX, right? These are all part of what users are going to experience as they use our system. So we need to think about, do they feel right? If I look at this, does it make sense how the users are going to want to configure their system? Are they consistent? I'm huge on consistency. And sometimes, like, we did the wrong thing over here, and we could do the right thing and be different, or we could do kind of the wrong thing and be consistent. I'm more often going to choose the consistent but slightly wrong thing. That depends on how wrong the first thing was. The principle of least surprise, right? Once you learn how one thing works, if you can take what you've learned and apply that to the other things, that's really powerful, right? And so we need to keep that in our systems. And I always like to ask myself, if I could start over, this is a mess. If I could throw the whole thing away, blow it up, and start over, what would I want it to look like, right? Now, can I move towards that? Again, as I'm looking through the code, I'm looking at testing, right? Sometimes, I got to admit, it's really attractive to just sort of skip the test files and assume that they've done the right thing. It's a really bad habit, and it's a really bad idea. And as somebody who has tried to pull off the not writing very good tests thing, it always comes back to bite you. So it's really important, as you're looking at a code change, to look at the test cases that go with it. And sometimes I'll pop open 2 separate windows, and I'll actually walk through the code and walk through the test cases and make sure that the interesting cases are being handled, right? What happens if I throw that negative number in? Does it return an error? And is there a test case that shows me that the error is properly returned? And again, some smells, like as you're looking at tests, like, are you setting global variables? Right? Are you calling global things like enabling or disabling controller manager flags from deep inside a test? Or are you using time, right? Any test that uses time is an immediate smell, right? I'm also looking for tests to think about ways that future me will probably want to break this code, and how can I defend against that? The tests are the only automatic signal we get, right? Now, I saw Wojciech over there, and he can give me a hard time for this. Every PR that goes in is going to have some impact on performance and scale, right? Kubernetes is a highly interwoven system, and our scalability actually really is material to the success of the project. So if you are writing a pull request and your motivation is performance or lock contention or scalability or something like that, you'd better have a benchmark, right? If you say, I'm reducing the time on this loop, I want you to show me where's the benchmark that shows me A and B, right? Because a lot of the obvious optimizations aren't. Go is actually really tricky this way, and I've had to learn over and over again that Go does a bunch of things cheaply that seem like they should be expensive. So those sorts of changes, especially if they're not obvious, they need to be well commented. I'll pick on Wojciech since he's out there. He sent me a bunch of PRs against kubeproxy that changed the way all the strings are allocated, right? And it makes the code more complicated. And I was really sort of, really? Do I really need to do this? And he showed me the benchmark, and I went, yep, I really need to do this, right? So it really matters. Now, I've gotten through most of this pull request. Is it complete? Do I feel like everything that is needed here is needed? Did the CLI part of it get included in the pull request? I don't really want to add things that need a CLI and then not add their CLI at the same time for client and server things, right? Or APIs and controllers. We have a lot of 2-part and 3-part concepts in Kubernetes. We don't want to merge those half-complete pull requests. I mentioned this, so. Now, this is my favorite one. Domain-specific knowledge, right? Kubernetes has a lot of subdomains in it. And sometimes I get pull requests for subsystems that I don't really know that well anymore, right? If somebody sends me a pull request for something in the scheduler, I feel very poorly equipped to actually review it because I don't know the surrounding code anymore, right? There's a whole team of people who've been working on it for years in my non-presence. I would rather see people decline those pull requests than try to do them without the appropriate domain knowledge, right? But if you're going to do them, go get the domain knowledge, right? Go talk to the people who actually do own it. So I can go talk to the scheduler folks, or if I have a problem that needs kubelet support, I will go talk to the kubelet people and understand, what does this mean? How does this work? What is the context of it? This is really important, and I see too many pull requests that are approved by people who probably don't have the appropriate context for it. And these are all bugs, right? They're the things that get in the system and come back later, and you go, what happened here? Who did this, right? And I hate, my least favorite command is git blame, right? So like I said, go get experience, right? For me, sometimes this means spelunking through the code. Git grep is my favorite command. I'm always looking for, where's this used? What's going on with this? If I return an error from this, who are my callers, right? I do lots of experiments, right? I have my clusters up and I'm constantly just like, this doesn't seem right. Let me run a little test. Let me throw this thing in. And building the experience that I need to do a particular PR. And as many people, especially the longtime maintainers know, I do not hesitate to reach out and say, can you help me, right? I don't know what this is doing. Can I get a consultation? And so I encourage everybody here to feel like this. Like, most of us are on Slack, right? If you're stuck on a PR and it's something that I can help you with, let me know. If you get to a place where you're just not sure, like absolutely 100% confident that this change is going to be okay, don't approve it, right? Don't be that rubber stamp. So let's talk, I guess, about commits and commit hygiene, right? We are not great at this as a project, right? Let's very, very frankly, we're not great at commit hygiene. I want to encourage everybody here to think about it as you're reviewing pull requests, to think about how do the commits that make up that pull request add up to the story, right? These are the permanent record. These are the things that go into Git. A pull request itself isn't really meaningful in the Git sense. So I am always encouraging people to take their PRs and break it down into smaller commits, where each commit sort of stands on its own and is meaningful on its own, that doesn't need to depend on the other things. And they make sense in order, right? It makes it way easier to review a big pull request too. Often we see this as, I did the API in one commit, I did the generated code in another commit, and I wrote the implementation in a third commit, right? This is a really common pattern. It makes Git bisect hard, but it makes reviews really easy. So this is a trade-off that we make. But we need to think about this, right? Now, one of the common things we do, because GitHub, is another commit that says fix comments, right? And you do another round of review and fix more comments. And now at the end, you've got 9 commits in your pull request, and the bottom 5 of them are all fix comments 1, fix comments 2. I don't want to merge that, right? Because those commits are not useful, right? Now you have to push back on your contributor and ask them to go and merge those commits back into their original commits. And Git gives you lots of tools for this, and somebody's doing a talk today on practical Git for Kubernetes users, which I hope will talk about the idea of interactive rebases and moving commits around the trees. It's okay to ask for this, right? And as a contributor, if you get asked for this, like, it's not the end of the world, it's not so hard, there are ways to get through it, but it actually is really important, it matters. Something that I'm personally pretty guilty of is bad commit comments, right? These things are, again, the permanent record. So when you say git log and you see the history of everything that's going on, those commit comments are all the clues you have as to what happened. And GitHub itself makes it a little tricky for you to go find those individual commit comments, right? You actually have to click on the separate commits tab and go read each of the individual commit comments. As a code reviewer, I need you to do that and demand that the commit comments actually make sense, right? As a contributor, I need you to think about, when you're writing those comments, what do I say that explains what I did and how I did it, that leaves a clue for the person who's going to look through the git log to understand it. There's nothing worse than having to run git blame on a file, finding a line, doing git log or git show on a single commit, and not understanding why the heck this commit was made, right? It's super frustrating when you're spelunking or trying to understand the history of it. So it's incumbent on us to push on people and make sure that we get good comments. The why is always more important than the how, but sometimes the how is really important too, in the commit comments, not in the code comments. And also referencing bugs is a great thing to do, right? Often we do that in the PR comments. Those don't make it into the permanent record. Pre-factoring is one of my favorite things. The idea of, we all know what refactoring is, right? But pre-factoring is when you've got a change you want to make and you're going to move some stuff around to make it easier to fit your change in, right? I'm going to add some parameters to this API, or I'm going to move these functions around, or I'm going to break it up, and I'm going to do it in a way that is a net no-op to the rest of the code base that shows that, a reviewer can look at the pre-factoring commit and say, this makes sense, there's nothing going on here. Why are you doing this? Well, I'm doing it so I can make room for my next commit to come in, and it'll be a much smaller change if I've done it in 2 steps, right? And very often I see pull requests that I have to stop and say, can you first do a commit that does all these renames and then add the thing on top of it instead of doing it all in one commit? Renames is a classic example here. And as a contributor, you should actually love it because you get more commits. Everybody's counting the points, right? So as a reviewer, it's not just acceptable, it's actually encouraged. Tell people to do this. If you do a PR that has 5 pre-factoring commits and then 1 actual commit, great, I love it. Procedurally, as a code reviewer now, if somebody sends you a PR, do ask questions, right? Most of when I'm writing a comment, anybody who's, again, been a victim of my pull requests, most of what I write are questions, right? Why did you do this? What's going on here? And I actually don't want you to answer the question to me. I want you to answer the question in the code, right? If I'm asking a question, it's not obvious from the code, right? Not mostly. And try to phrase the questions in a human way, right? Am I understanding this? Because maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm kind of an idiot, so maybe I'm just not following what you're trying to do here. Or why did you make this choice? Like I said before, if I write probably twice as many comments as I actually send, right? Because I start writing the comments, then I get further down and I go, oh, I understand that now, and I can go back and close out that comment. If you send every comment you write, you're probably doing it wrong. And then, I often will explain my thinking to someone, I don't follow this, because if X is true, then Y can't be, so why are you testing for this thing over here when you should have checked it way before? And then I've explained what I want to see out of their code review, or out of their pull, and they can go back and act on those things. Right? As a reviewer, you are a representative of Kubernetes, right? So you need to put on your best face and be excellent to each other. Code of conduct applies in the code reviews, too. It's okay to push back and ask for changes on a pull request, right? It's actually pretty rare that a pull request comes through and is perfect the first time through, right? I know when I send pull requests, I get comments all the time, and it's fine. It's part of the game, going back and forth and getting the thing the way you want it to be. But do be clear when you're doing a code review about how much you care about a thing, right? Sometimes it's well, this is not really named ideally, but I guess it's okay, right? Sometimes it's I really will not accept this until you make a change for me. It's also important to not pick all of the nits when fundamentally the architecture is wrong, right? Because as a contributor, you have this experience of okay, cool, they found 25 little things to fix, and then you get to the last one and says, yeah, but actually I don't think we should do it this way, right? That's kind of obnoxious. So do look for the general architecture and pattern first before you jump into the nitpicking. As much as it's fun to pick the nits, and sometimes when you're busy, the nits are easier to pick than the architectural things, go for the big fish first. And as you're doing a code review, sometimes, especially if you draw me, it's a lot of back and forth, right? And so I try to indicate progress, right? Okay, I think we're almost there. Most of my comments are relatively small at this point, so that somebody can understand where they are in the life cycle of a pull. It's pretty frustrating when they think they've just finished everything that you've asked them to do, and then you drop a whole new bomb on them, right? And they have to go back and do it again. And I apologize to anybody to whom I've done that. I'm trying to be much more cognizant of it. But at the end of it, we have these deadlines, right? This is part of our community, right? We release on time or the train will leave without you, right? Do not approve things because you feel guilty, or approve things because the deadline is here and I really want you to make the train even though you really shouldn't. I've seen it happen. I've actually done it. It's terrible. We shouldn't do it. There's always another release, right? It's 3 months away. That's not that far. Within a couple of weeks, the door will be open again, and you can get your stuff merged. Don't be afraid to ask for changes. Like, I keep saying the same thing, but as the code reviewers, you are empowered to ask people to make changes, to talk about the code, to understand what they're doing and why. This is your job. This is what you volunteered for by taking on a code review. But do be reasonable, right? People own their own code, and they won't always do it exactly the way you think they should or the way you would have done it, and that's okay, right? That's part of being in the community. So be reasonable when they come back with something that addresses what you actually wanted them to do, even if it's not exactly what you would have done, right? So in my mind, when I'm doing a review, I'm always thinking about, well, what would I call this variable, or how would I structure this loop? And I suggest it, but I say, it's yours to figure out. And be willing to be wrong, right? This is my favorite part, is when I say, well, actually, this isn't going to work, and somebody comes back and says, oh, you missed that we set this variable up at the top of the loop. And I go, oh, right, thank you, of course. And try to be reasonable and be willing to, if you're having a debate about something, be willing to be wrong and acquiesce, right? I think it makes for a stronger community when people can argue with each other, but if you get too adamant that you're never going to lose an argument, we will lose that culture, right? I think that's a good part of our culture right now, that we can actually have frank, vigorous debate, and then when we're done with it, we're done with it, right? And it doesn't become personal, right? So you're always critiquing the code, not the people, right? Never say, why are you such an idiot? I mean, why are you doing this the wrong way? It's why does this code do it the wrong way? That's really subtle language things that can make a huge difference. Now, I talked a little bit before about tech debt and strategic debt. We're a project, we want to move fast, we want to press forward all the time. So sometimes we do take on debt, right? But we want to be really strategic about taking on technical debt. Most PRs should not be introducing debt, they should be paying debt off. If you think that there's a place where you can take a shortcut and allow it because something really important can get done and you can come back and fix it later, then let's talk about the trade-offs and let's talk about what the risk of this really is. You take it to your SIG or the multiple SIGs if you're crossing those boundaries, and talk to each other, right? We have to trust each other to make good decisions, and sometimes the right decision is to press forward and get something done in a sort of dirty, gross way if we can come back and fix it in a reasonable time later, or if the risk is low, right? So at the end of the day, after all this, code review is community service, right? And this is why we're all here, right? It's amazing. Went to this social last night, and it was really like hanging out with hundreds of my best friends, right? I thank everybody in the room for being willing to come and listen to me talk about code review, which is, gosh, the most exciting thing all day, right? Because it's really important to me, and I am super thankful that everybody here is willing to do this. If you don't have time, that's okay, right? Either make the time or don't, it's fine, but don't do it halfway. We have to live in our code base, right? For all of us, day in and day out, we're working on this thing, and every time we find one of these things that you look at and you go, God, who did this? Right, it breaks my heart a little bit. So let's try not to leave so many of those landmines around. But do trust your instincts, right? Everybody here has a sense of what's good and what's not, right? And we all have a sense of smell. We can tell when you look at something, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. If it doesn't look right, go and investigate it. Now, sometimes you'll be wrong, right? But you'll learn something either way. Either you found a bug in the code or you found a bug in your instincts, right? And you can adapt. And over time, if you spend enough time staring at Kubernetes code, you'll start to understand the things that tend to work and the things that tend not to work. And again, if you don't understand it, if you're not sure of it, don't approve it. Ask for somebody else to look at it, right? There's a great body of people. We've sort of got a pyramid going, right? If you're not sure what's going on, reach up the pyramid and get Jordan to help you review it, because Jordan knows everything, right? But Jordan can't do every pull request. So if we can get the majority of people handling the majority of pull requests, then Jordan's really working on the important ones, right? And the hard ones. And again, just don't be a rubber stamp, right? It's super tempting to look at pull requests, even from people you know and trust, people you work with day in and day out, and just say, well, it's Frank, he's smart, approved, right? Without even looking at it. It's a disaster. And every time I've done it, and I'm guilty, I've done it, every time I've done it, it almost always comes back to bite me in the butt, right? And it's so embarrassing when Wojtek calls you up and says, you broke the scalability test, why did you approve this PR? And you go, because I didn't look at it closely enough, right? And that's on me, and now it's on you. So to people who are sending PRs, I hope we have everybody in this room does both of these jobs, right? Code review is exponential to the size of the PR, right? Exponential, right? We all know what that means. The bigger your PR is, the longer it's going to take me to review it. You send me a small PR, I will probably find time to review it today or tomorrow. You send me a medium PR, I will probably find time to review it this week. You send me an XXL PR, I will probably find time to review it this year, right? And really, like, I've done these XXL PRs when sometimes that's the only way to do it, and they take hours and hours and hours to go through these code reviews, and on any given day, I don't always have hours that I can spend to it. So I'm encouraging you to try to break your things up and find more ways to schedule into the code review system. The end. Anybody has, what questions do we have here? Anybody wants to talk to me about what they hate about code review?
What do you think about like machinery tools? You know, you make maybe 4 lines, and all of a sudden you just run the script and you head your tabs. You have about 5,000 lines of change and you didn't actually do anything. And then its version is a single commit. There should be multiple commits. So do you have guidance on that?
You mean like generated code?
I mean to say those should be separate commits.
On specifically on generated code or on human done but sort of mechanical thing? I often ask people to put generated code in a separate commit just because it's easier to review. But I will say GitHub's actually gotten much better. Like the tools in GitHub in the last year have gotten significantly better here, so that the changed since last viewed feature is actually really great. And it's much easier for me to open the files view now and scan down and see how many of these things are auto-generated and just sort of close them. I don't need to review the auto-generated code because the CI system will regenerate it and compare and make sure that they're not wrong. And so more and more, I'm actually starting to lean on, actually put them in the same commit so that things like git bisect will eventually work, right? Other questions? Yep.
But then it's going to be much harder to interact with rebase and replace it with different versions.
Yes. This is challenging. This is a place where, sorry, to repeat the question, like if you have a bunch of things that you're going to fix, small changes that are scattered throughout the pull, and the simplest thing to do is to make a bunch of your changes and add a new commit that says fix comments, right? And it is really attractive and actually makes the reviews really easy, because I can look at that last commit and say, yes, in fact, you did the things that I asked for. But that's only true at a small scale, right? If I asked you for 25 things and I see a commit that has 24 changes in it, do I really know that you got all the things that I wanted you to get? And this is a place actually, in my experience, the tooling around GitHub is actually pretty lacking still, right? One of the things that GitHub does that's nice and awful at the same time is if I put a comment on a line and then you go and you change the line, GitHub will make the comment go away, right? Well, it's great because I can see that there are no outstanding comments. It's awful because I don't remember what I said, right? And so what I find myself frequently doing is literally opening multiple tabs or multiple Chrome windows, having one open with my last commit or my last comment review, which actually has all my comments on them, and going through each of my comments one by one and making sure that the change that I asked for is in there. And at that point, the extra commit doesn't save me any time in reviewing because I'm looking at the overall file view anyway. So for the sake of things like git bisect and just good commit hygiene, I prefer to go and make those fix-ups in the commits that they make sense in. Now, as a contributor, especially if you have a lot of commits, now this is something I do a lot, I don't know if everybody does this, but I love tiny little commits, right? Rename this variable, commit. Fix some comments, commit. Move this function to the top of the file, commit. And now if you say, okay, well, actually, I don't like the comment in this function, and I moved it, and then I changed the comment, and then I renamed the thing in 3 separate commits, I actually have to go through those commits and do that interactive rebase, or I have to do the fix-ups along the way. I think that's part of the cost of just doing this. The commit hygiene matters. And if you look at other communities like the Linux kernel community, which is not always a paragon of ideals, they have really good commit hygiene, right? And if you look at the Git history of the Linux kernel, it's very clear what happened and when and by who, right? And maybe in that respect, we should strive to do better. What trends have I seen for reviewers missing problems? Great question. I don't know that I've identified any particular trend. The biggest one is reviewers approving things when they don't have the full context, right? It's a complicated system at this point. And so if I'm coming in as a domain expert on a networking thing, and I see that somebody approved a PR that touched something in networking land but didn't understand really what it was doing or why, that's when I get frustrated, right? Because I would have rather you called me and or Slacked me and said, hey, can you take a look at this, right? Because finding it later after the fact is super frustrating. So it's the domain-specific knowledge is the biggest one that I've seen. Or simply not being tough enough. Like, APIs matter. Kubernetes utils in particular, I'm ruthless about those APIs. Anybody who's watched me do those code reviews there, I'm gonna pick the heck out of those APIs because that should be the very best of the public APIs that we're offering. And that means taking code from Kubernetes and moving it into Kubernetes utils isn't enough, right? You taking the code, I'm gonna ask you to think about that API again, start it from first principles. Is that the API we really want? I know it was implemented that way before, but is it the way we really want it? I'm gonna ask about the function names, I'm gonna ask about the comments, I'm gonna ask about the testing, and there's at least one pull request that's stuck in my queue right now. Somebody took a block of complicated code out of Kubernetes, moved it to Kubernetes utils, and I went, this is interesting, I'm gonna actually think really hard about this. And I found a massive, huge fundamental flaw in the code, and basically kind of needs to be rewritten. The whole API is wrong. It expresses something that isn't gonna work. That code still exists in Kubernetes, right? That bug still exists in Kubernetes. And now we've got to go back and figure out how do we fix that original bug before we try to move the code out again, right? But it was only because it came up to the utils level that I even took a look at that.
I think that there is one thing that I'm, for example, catching myself is that if I touched some code in the past and I knew how it was working, I used to kind of try to be assuming that it's still working the same. But I'm obviously not reviewing every single change and technology change. And the fact that something we want to do in the past doesn't mean that it works.
So the comment being, if you wrote a piece of code in the first place, or if you're very familiar with it, you can come back later and you tend to assume that it still works the way you left it. But there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people changing our code base. That's not actually a safe assumption, and it's true, right? I've found code and changes that I don't understand, and I don't know where they came from, and I go run git blame, and I say, oh, somebody made this change, okay, let me go backtrack to try to figure out why this change was made. And most of the time it's fine and it's correct, but sometimes I track back and I go, oh, I disagree with the way this was done, right? And there's really no answer to that. It's a distributed project with lots of people who have owners, responsibilities, and so there's no blame here, right? Blame is not a useful thing in this point, but understanding what happened and how is important. And often that means, where's the test, right? Was there a test that covered this thing in the first place, right? So every time you take a shortcut and you write a piece of code and you go, the test for this would be hard, I'll just skip it. You're laying a time bomb for yourself. So the question is, what's my personal workflow? My personal workflow is a little weird and a little unfortunate. Basically, at this point, if I'm not assigned something in GitHub, I probably won't see it. Now, I actually do, I can actually show it if it's interesting. I probably shouldn't. I use, it's my mailbox. I use Gmail, saved searches, so, multiple inbox. And I create multiple inboxes with different queries, and then I set the limit to show messages to 0. So what I get on my screen is a bunch of lines that have a view all button, and the view all button is like a saved query. So I have my usual routine. I come in the morning, the first button I hit is everything in my inbox that is not Kubernetes related, and I read that. And then it's everything in my inbox that's not, everything in my inbox that's directly to me, that's not a copy or a mailing list or something else, right? And I go read those. And then I have GitHub P0, GitHub P1, GitHub P2. GitHub P0 is everything from GitHub that is assigned to me. And it automatically gets a red label in my mailbox view. But when I click that, what I see is all the PRs and issues that are assigned to me, right? And I read that pretty much every day. And so if you assign an issue to me, I will see it, right? Now go back to the main view and hit GitHub P1. That's all the issues that mention me, right? Or where the system has automatically asked me for a review, but it isn't assigned to me. I don't view that every day. I don't even view that every week, right? I don't get that far every week. So this is why sometimes people are pinging me on an issue, and I don't ever see it because it's stuck in that P1 category, right? And P2 is, I think, things that are like group mentioned, so they're like not that important. But I get a ton of GitHub P1s, right? And I feel bad because I'm missing interesting and useful stuff, but there's only so much a single person can do, and I agree that the tooling is sort of lacking. This is the best mechanism I've found. I need to wrap up. If anybody has other questions, I'm happy to sit and pontificate about code review. If you feel like you're struggling with code review, like you don't feel comfortable or safe doing code review or pushing back on people, talk to me and we can talk through it. Everybody here, anybody who's willing to do a code review, you are my best friend and you are my first line of defense against the utter onslaught of brain-rotted zombies. No, that's wrong. That's a movie. You are the defense against entropy, right? Left to its own devices, all code will rot. It's our job to make sure it doesn't. Thank you.